Okay, today we're going to go over a basic editing workflow for raw images, mostly in Lightroom. So the first thing I want you guys to do is to put your raw images, the ones you want to look at when you edit, in a separate folder. Okay. I wouldn't edit off of your thumb drives. Drag those onto the computer, put them in a folder and label it. It's going to help things become uh, easier to find. I'm going to open up Lightroom here. And remember, you can get your photos in any number of ways. So it's going to open up to probably this or something like this. Now you can get to your pictures in your folder over here in the library. And if you don't see that, this tab at the top, this little button right here will hide and show the library. And we'll go around and kind of look at all these other buttons around the interface here shortly. So I can, my folders are my desktop, so I can click in the desktop there, go down and click on that folder. And what that's going to do is then show you one of the pictures, and then every picture in the folder is going to be down here in what's called the film strip. Notice that everything is kind of couched in analog photo terms. But so this is called film strip. This is just the photos that are in that folder that we're highlighting over here. Of course, the other way to get to these things is to, when you have your folder, just right click on one of the images in your folder and say open with Lightroom. And that will get you to the same place, and it will once again open those images, all the images in the folder. So we can now click on these images. Now I have both raw and a couple of the associated JPEGs with them, so we can kind of look at the difference. Um, Once you're in that space, you can then go and kind of close this. I'm just going to click on that and hide that. So let's look at some of the interface, excuse me, elements. Here we have a back and forward. So if I want to go back to something, in this case, the folder, I can go back to it or go forward, back in my immediate folder that I was already in. Here we have a search bar. So if you have a bunch of named photos in this folder, it's like 500 or something, you can search for a folder there. And then you can refine your search here. You won't really need that. We have a couple of information buttons here, help and share and notifications if you're on Adobe Cloud. We're not really concerned with that either. Um, Down at the bottom, we have some views here where we can see multiple images up on the screen at once. So we can see all our film strip images a little bigger size there. Um, and then you can go back to the full image browser or the full work window. And if you don't want to see, if you want to make the most of your screen space, you're working on a laptop, you can of course come over here and hide that thing to make your image as big as possible. Remember, especially when you're working on these lab computers, make the image big. You want to see all the detail. You want to see it as kind of fill that space so you can really look at it. Now, notice also when we hover over the image, the default pointer is a magnifying glass. So at any time we can click in the image, zoom in and zoom out. It gives us kind of a default zoom in level. Down here, we have some grading. So Lightroom is really made for batch processing, very fast. So you can do things like 1 or 5 star your pictures and kind of organize them that way. So if you're dealing with a large library, it becomes very important to search through your pictures and be able to retrieve them very fast. You can also put check marks or X marks if you don't want rejected or as picked. Um, we're not dealing with quite such big batches, so we won't worry about that. What we're really concerned with is this area over here. We have on the far right side, we have our kind of processing panels here. So this version of Photoshop, which includes excuse me, this version of Lightroom, which includes the cloud stuff, these are here. But in the Lightroom Classic, they would be up here. And the interface looks a little bit different, but once you learn kind of what you're looking for, you'll be able to navigate through both. So let's take a look at the top button there. That's the preset. So this course comes with lots of presets. Um, we don't want to use presets, but I'll kind of show you shortly how they are useful. But you can just hover your mouse over various presets and get a good look at how how your photo might look if you did what Adobe suggests. Notice that opens its own little panel here. So this other one is still open. So this is the develop or edit panel. Up at the top, we have our familiar histogram. Very useful. And if you look at these little arrows right at the corners, when I hover my mouse over that, it's going to show me what areas if I hover the right one, it's going to show me what areas are clipped. If I hover the left one, it's going to show me what black areas are clipped. And you can see there's not much. If I click, it'll kind of hold it there. In this particular image, there's not much clipping in the black, right? It's just right there. So that's pretty good. There's a little bit of clipping in the white. Um, if I wanted to use an auto setting, and that would be right there. I still have the tooltips on for these, but you can turn those off in the settings. Or if I wanted to start with a black and white image, I could click on that, and I would just kind of jump right into editing black and white. We're going to work in color in this project, so most likely. So we'll stay with color. Now, the next little section here, profiles, and they're kind of a starting edit. So you can kind of look through there, and they are kind of common things. So if I went down to portrait, it's going to make kind of some changes to that. These are lighter changes than it would be in the presets, but it'll give you kind of a starting place. You can see like the vivid one makes everything pop a little bit more, a little crisper. Portrait's a little bit softer. The regular Adobe color, not too different from portrait. But let's kind of stick to this so we can learn our way through it. Um, we're going to come back and kind of go through all these things, but let's go uh, touch into some of these other ones. A lot of people like to start with this kind of crop. Um, and you should remember this, should be familiar from Photoshop. You click on that, it gives you the little corners, which you can then kind of crop if you want to crop. And if you're doing the cinematic stills, you may have to bring yours down to achieve the same format that your stills are. So you have sort of the same kind of space to do that. And you can set the aspect ratio here. So if it's a 16 by 9 movie, you can set that at 16 by 9 and then scale that in and out. Okay. Um, what we're going to do though is start with the full image on this one. You can also rotate. So if you have anything that's not straight, you can kind of rotate and it'll pop up a grid for you. And you can see that right there. This one looks pretty good, so I don't need to do anything to it. There are some removal tools here, and it's going to let you kind of try that. I'm not really going to go over that, but you can explore that if you need it. This is very similar to some of the content-aware fills and generative fills in Photoshop. Um, if you need it for your project, we can jump in there and look at it. And then the last one we'll come back to. That's a masking button, and that should be familiar with you. We're going to use that a little bit for this photograph. Okay. So back to the kind of initial developing. So we're back in the develop tab. Um, we're going to kind of go through this top to bottom as we need. We won't use every one for every photo, but you get an idea of kind of what some of these controls can do. So let's step back for a second and think about what this is. These are raw images. That means they're nearly the data captured from the sensor without any processing. So if we take a look at, I have a variety of raw images and JPEGs in here uh, from different cameras. So this one is from my drone. And if we look at this and then look at the JPEG it captured at the same time, you can see that it processed that JPEG. So it thought, okay, this is a little dark. There's a weird kind of balance of dark and light, so I need to make that brighter. And it, added a lot of brightness in there. But that said, if we go back and look at in the folder at the let's see, it's these two. These are the ones I was just showing you. That's the raw, that's the JPEG. And if we look over here at the size, the raw is 24.5 megabytes and the JPEG is 5.5. So there's more information in that raw file to work with. Um, that's the draw, the JPEG is a compression. It modifies the image and compresses it. So in order to get the best quality, in order to have the most information to work with, we're going to work from the raw. So we have that raw. I have a couple of raw images from the my iPhone 15 Pro, which I think is also applying some sort of tone adjustments in there. It's really good quality for a phone. Really get in here and look at the detail. The rest of these are from my Sony A7R3 with another 40 megapixel, 40-ish megapixel sensor. So when you're looking at the raw ones, this is the raw, this is the JPEG. Some of these you're going to see there's not much difference. Okay. In fact, in this one, I just like the plain raw shot just as much better than the JPEG. And that may happen. But in some of them, you can see there's a stark difference, like from that to that. Um, these two, this is the raw. You can see how kind of dark this is and how kind of bright this is in the back, whereas the JPEG tried to brighten that up a little bit. Okay. Um, these, we have the raw here. It's a little darker, a little flatter, and the JPEG brightened it up. So you can see my Sony camera doesn't do anything real fancy with the JPEGs. It just brightens them up a little bit, and it actually the RAWs look a lot better. Uh, so even if it's raw, it might not need a lot of editing to make a good photo, but it might. So we'll take a look at a couple of these. So I think this one's pretty good. We're not going to mess with that. We wouldn't need too much, I don't think. This one needs some work. You know, this is backlit. It's a good picture, good detail on the face and the eyes. Got the smile I wanted. Composition's not too bad. Um, but it needs a good balance, a better balance between the background and foreground, and the RAW is going to allow us to do that. This one we'll take a look at in a few minutes and do some quick adjustments to try and brighten up this foreground. This is a more extreme version of that backlighting. And once again, this is also backlit. So all three of them I work on, I picked are kind of backlit images. Let's go back to this one and start with this. So let's take a look at some of the things we have available to us in the light. So this allows us to adjust exposures generally to very selectively. And the first slider is exposure. So I can drag that and you can see it's gonna brighten that whole image. Now watch what's happening to the histogram up here as I move that exposure. It's gonna push all those values kind of to the right, and it's gonna get those into that kind of middle area. Now that might seem good, but you can see what that does is it really blows out all the bright areas. It really pushed more and more into the bright. Um, and when I come down, you're actually going to see there's actually more detail in there than it seemed like. So we need to strike a balance here. And we're going to do that in a couple of ways. So this one's going to be pretty tricky. So exposure will brighten or darken the entire image evenly. Contrast is going to, watch the histogram there. Contrast is going to push the midtones down towards the bottom, or the lower midtones towards the bottom, and the higher midtones up towards the top, increasing that contrast. That's not really going to do much for us on that right now. Highlights is going to brighten those highlights or darken them. So see that one, oh, that's not too bad. That's starting to get kind of what we want. If we take a look at the face here, we drop that down, the face isn't changing much because the face is in the mid-tone range, right? But what we want to get is some detail back there, right? So we're going to drop that a little bit and kind of keep that in mind. The shadows are going to lower or brighten the shadows. So we take a look up here at the histogram. That's going to sort of pull down, if we move it to the right, kind of pull down those blacks a little bit and sort of push them over to the right. So it's going to brighten up those dark areas. And you can see it doesn't really affect the lighter areas of the photo. So we have highlights and shadows. We also have whites and blacks. Okay, so this is going to affect. So if you think about moving down, you move from general to slightly more specific to even more specific. So this really has to do with the adjusting the very much darker tones rather than these. So these are a little more specific to the whites and the blacks. You can see if I do the whites, it really just hits that area there. The blacks is a little harder to tell, but it really can blow that up a little bit. Now the tone curve here, it's a little harder to use, but it does kind of the same thing. So as these, so right now, so you can tell it which one you want to adjust, what of the RGB or the values in the picture. So take a look at this. So we have this line that moves from black on the bottom left to white at the top right. And we can move these points. We hover over that point, we can drag it and move it. So what happens when I move this black up, or this point up, that's all the way on black, You can see it just takes away all the blacks, and you can see that especially in the histogram up here in the corner. So that all of a sudden there's nothing down there in the black tones just by moving that up. And the same, I can do the same with the whites. Now that's not super useful on itself, but what we can do is click anywhere on this tone curve and start to create a curve. And a lot of people think a little S curve looks really good on photos. Now for us, that's kind of popping the contrast up quite a bit. It's not quite getting us where we want. You can, if you accidentally click on a control or make it a control point, you can just left right click on that and say delete the control point. So you can kind of play with this curve a little bit. In this case, it'll actually brighten up those darker areas if I pull that kind of up, and I can play with where that is. Do that. I find this a little easier to do with the sliders. That's just because I'm not super practiced with the tone curve. You can also adjust curves on separate channels. So if I click the red, you're going to see now it's red and green. And if I move this up, everything's going to turn red, right? So it's going to take all that information and sort of push it into the red area. So this takes even kind of more deliberateness, but we might get into that trying to capture some of your filmic looks. Um, so that's the light area. And then the next section is color. This gets a little more complicated. Now, the kind of the biggest thing we want to deal with in the color is this white balance. Now, most cameras have an auto white balance. That doesn't mean it's always correct. So let's say I took this picture, I want to adjust the white balance. Maybe it's too warm or too cool. I can come in here and I can try a couple of things. It's got these kind of settings, so I can set the auto white balance. And if I move my mouse over these, it should change. It's a little hard to see. I think it changes just slightly cooler. If I drop down to the daylight, it's actually going to make it warmer. So it had kind of balanced for that. Um, Cloudy, even warmer because it thinks it's might going to be cool. Shade. So what this is trying to compensate for those things. It's not trying to mimic them, it's trying to compensate for them. Um, so what you can do if you want to set it manually is grab this dropper here and click something on the photo that should be a neutral color. So I think maybe this white horse might work, kind of a mid-tone gray. So let's see what happens when I click on that. And what that did is that cooled that image down a little bit. Um, and that, this is a great place for me to stop and say, um, all this editing, there's not kind of one right thing. We talked at the beginning of the semester about it being important to capture all that data. Once you've captured all that data, once you haven't blown it out, you got a good composition, you've captured all the data. Now's the time to really start making choices. So if you click on that and you think, oh, I don't really like it, well, you can change. You can do this. If you want to kind of push it towards being cool, you can do that. You want to push it towards being warm, you can do that. On a photo like this is not an art photo. It is a family photo. It's probably a good idea. I don't know. You'd have to be the judge of this. You can push things a little in either direction, but you don't need to make them different from photo to photo. And then people will be going, why is that photo different from that other photo you showed me? Um, so that's kind of important. You also don't want to make it seem unnatural like that. So. have to use your judgment. You have to start making choices on these things. All right. So the slider I was just working is the temperature. So this adjusted in the same kind of the same way, but a more extreme version of the white balance. So that's going to warm everything up. It's going to cool everything off. So we got a yellow blue there. We also have a red and green tint. Okay. So if you have something that's casting a red light, you want to change that, you can get in there and monkey around with that. Um, Vibrance. Vibrance is an interesting tool. So Vibrance is going to find things that are kind of flat and sort of pump up the saturation. So take a look in this area. The computer's trying to decide, oh, does it need some pop over there? When I drag that tool, vibrant tool up, it's really it's looking for things to kind of make pop in there. And if I come down, it sort of flattens and evens out the image, right? So you can see when I go way too far with it, I even get some weird purple stuff happening in the shirt here. Um, so once again, you got to use your eyes, use your judgment. Most of these things are fairly subtle. And then saturation is the one, it's a little more general than the vibrance. You can pump the saturation up and everything gets blown, the colors get exaggerated, or you can take it all out. So a lot of people like a slightly desaturated look, um, but it kind of depends on what you want. Now, remember, a lot of times in these sections, we go from general to more specific. So now in the color mixer, you can adjust, colors just on their own. So let's say I wanted to just adjust kind of the pink tones of the skin here. This, I think if I was to go back and kind of adjust this and shoot this purposefully, I might not have her wear a shirt that is kind of pinkish tone like her skin. So, so what happens is I've kind of selected color, and that pink's not really it. So maybe it's more of in the red area. Yeah. Take a look at if we look at her cheeks. Let's zoom in here. Take a look at the cheeks and the lips. So I'm on the red. Now, as I do that, she starts to look a little sickly. So I'm taking that red out of her face and it's kind of putting in the yellow, and it really does a number on the lips. Oof, don't want that. Looks awful. If we go too far, she looks like she's got a little rosacea or something. So this is tricky. One thing you can do is do the target adjustment color mixer. Click on that. You're going to come in here. And what you can do is you see it brought up this little guy here. You can hover over something and then click in that area there to kind of be a little more targeted. So if I wanted to take some of the pink out of her face, I could just kind of come in here and touch it down a little bit like that. All right. And we also have you can adjust the saturation of that specific tone and of course the luminance of that tone too. So each of these kind of affects those things in kind of specific ways. Now, this is even more focused, right? So if I select a color point in the picture, let's select this person's shirt. Now I can really just go in. Now, of course, it's affecting the whole picture, so it's really affecting all those kind of red tones in there. Let's try something else. Let's see what happens when I do that blue one. So now it's not affecting a lot of the faces because they're not in that blue thing, but it's really kind of changing that blue. So you can sort of desaturate specific colors or change their luminance, which means how looks like they're glowing or not glowing, that kind of thing, and adjust the range. I really would prefer to use Photoshop and masks for this. Um, that's the color section. Um, I would really kind of think about this first section as your kind of most important to deal with in your raw editing. The rest of them are really just if you have things to um, big problems you need to fix or some specific things you need to really deal with. But playing with that saturation, a little bit of vibrance, can be really interesting. Okay. So that's the color. The next one is the effects. Now, you probably won't use these too much. Well, actually, since you guys are doing these kind of film inspired, um, you might use these. So let's say you have you want to get kind of a grainy film look down at the bottom here. It's a grain slider, and that is going to add grain. Okay, it's a simulated sort of photo type grain from none to full on. So maybe you go with that. That could be interesting. Vignette adds a little bit of well, or a lot of kind of darkness around the edges. You really want to be careful. Sometimes I find I get a little distracted by kind of bright things in the corners, and I will vignette just a little bit down like that. Now I find that adds a little bit, but I really don't like to overdo it. Dehaze. Um, Dehaze is going to, it's sort of a play on contrast, but it's a little more subtle. So. Well, I'll show you another photo that this will work kind of interestingly on. Clarity too, we'll do some sharpening. Clarity is actually really nice to my eyes, but so I like clarity when we kind of look in the in these kind of areas. It'll sort of pump up the um, color contrast a little bit. Okay, you kind of see it sort of brings that contrast up, but it's uh, not as aggressive as the regular contrast lighter, but what you have to be careful with is skin tones. So, everybody wants that sort of creamy, even skin tone. And when you start to pump up the clarity, it's really kind of bringing out some of that detail coming to an excessive amount. Okay. So be careful with your skin tones on this, and the same with texture. You don't want to get it down, look like you smeared the lens with Vaseline, but if you notice you have a little too much texture, you can drop that a little bit. Or if you're kind of emulating a sort of vintage lo-fi camera, you can probably drop that some. Or if you want that kind of aggressively, overly punchy detail, you can kind of play with that. Um, Once again, we're down here in this next section. I was just using the term detail, but we have, a kind of a sharpening tool. Now, this is actually a little less aggressive. Um, so it's not too bad. It's still add detail in those skin tones, but it's not nearly as bad. This noise reduction gets a little complicated. I would actually use the denoise stuff. Now, this one doesn't really need it. We'll take a look at a different one for that. Optics allows you to correct for lens distortions. Um, if you're shooting at a super wide angle, you can do lens corrections. You can see what that, if you notice what that does, that sort of makes it, it kind of bulges it out. So it's sort of to compensate for something that is excessively the other way. So if you need to take out some distortion from your wide angle, you can do it there. Or lens vignetting. So some lenses naturally vignette around the edges, and you can compensate for that. So you probably won't need that, but it's there if you do. And geez, I'd have to even look up what fringe is. You won't worry about that. In lens blur, you can add blur to things. Okay. And it's trying to estimate it. This is pretty complicated and high tech. Um, but it's trying to blur the background. We're going to use our lenses for that. We don't really need to do that, or I would do that in Photoshop. Okay, so that's our kind of outline of the editing panel, right? It got a lot of tools in there, but that's not really solving our problem with this image, and it is an issue. This kind of light dark balance here. So what do we need? Well, we need a mask, and that is over in this panel here. Um, I prefer Photoshop for masks, but for some of them this works just fine. I like the kind of the automatic ones. They seem to do pretty good. We're going to select the subject mask. It's going to find the subject. Now it may work, it may not, but you can see here it just selected the subject. And you can tell because it's got the kind of red overlay on it. Um, when this is the mask panel, by the way. When I'm over the mask panel, it shows me the mask. When I'm not over the mask panel, it doesn't show me that. So I can go back to the and also now we're in the editing of the mask itself. So we have to go back to that. We have to edit the mask. So you can see it's mask one. So let's drag a light. Okay, well, now we can adjust just the light on her. And that looks crazy and absurd, so we don't want to use that. So maybe what we want to do is come down here to uh the shadows on her. I'm gonna brighten those up a little bit. That's a little bit better. Brighten up the highlights in her, the whites. We have to find that kind of spot where it looks natural. And I'm gonna actually take the blacks down. So I want there to be a little more light on her face. But it's all about the details and the subtlety. Okay, that's already a little bit better there. We can look at the before and after by clicking this button down here at the bottom. So that's the raw. That's just with the edits I've made so far. Isn't that crazy? Once again, when we're doing this to the face, you gotta watch those skin tones. Okay, the more I sort of pump that contrast, the more difficult it is to get a nice even skin tone. So there you may come down into texture and just soften that back a little bit better. I'm going to create a new mask. Now, I'm going to do subject again. That's mask two, but I actually don't want to be working on it. I want to be working on everything else. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say invert subject selection. That's going to give me a mask that deals with the background. So now we can come in here and say, oh, well, let's see if we can recover some of the detail in there. So let's drop that a little bit. We're going to drop these kind of whites. Let's drop these highlights down. There we go. That's kind of what I'm looking for. That's going to get that detail back in that background. So let's flip this back and forth here. All of a sudden, I've got a much better photo. Um, that sort of gives you an idea of how to do this. The masking here is not the easy. I don't find it the easiest to work with. Um, but you can do things like add to masks and subtract from them. Um, and you can, you can do some stuff to them to make them a little bit more like Photoshop. But I prefer being able to see the mask kind of in a different way. I like to see it in the layers panel. It makes it easier for me to kind of figure out what's going on. But for this kind of editing, it's not too bad. Okay, so I don't really need to do anything to save this right now. So if I wanted to export it, I could export it. Um, I did want to point out though that one way to kind of do this is kind of get an idea of what these sliders can do is to open up this presets. And let's take a look at our light panel. So if I and then I hover over this bright preset, this bright color preset, you can see what it's doing to those things. Okay, with the high contrast. So it gives you an idea of what's happening. So this one is a matte. And if you look over here on the curve, it pulls away from the blacks and the whites, which is kind of interesting. Um, and you can go through all these and kind of look at them. So and kind of see what they're doing. It's an interesting way to kind of learn about what's happening in the software and what its effect is. So let's take a look at another. You don't really have to save these, by the way. What this does is it puts another file in your folder. So this is a metadata file, right? So Lightroom knows to look at it associates that with that file. So that is the data. So if you wanted to get rid of your edits, you can just delete this file and it'll go back to normal. So these are non-destructive edits. That's what I'm getting at. Let's take a look at a couple other ones here, um, real quick. Keep prattling on. Let's go back to this one. Um, so the first thing I think I would do on this one, I think is straighten it. Because you notice this kind of land here, it looks a little bit off to me. So I'm going to grab that and just kind of straighten it. It's going to auto kind of crop that. That should be good. Hit the return button. Back in the editing dialog. So we can kind of start to look at this, look at the exposure, contrast. Contrast is not quite what we want there. I think what we want to do is start to bring some of these shadows up. So what we want to do is bring this level of detail here up without losing the detail in the sky. So we're going to bring those shadows up a little bit. I don't think we want to bring the blacks up because it sort of looks washed out there. So we want to kind of leave that there, bring the shadows up some, sort of like that. I'm going to come down here and kind of mess with the temperature a little bit. It's a little warm, so the sky is kind of artificially yellow to me. I don't quite like it. So I'm going to back that temperature down a little bit cooler. That feels like a little bit more like I remember it. The tint. So if we want to pull those greens up a little bit, we could kind of do that, but it sort of makes a sickly color to the sky. So maybe we come down in here, select the green, and we can, let's see, let's see if we can, yeah, that's better. Yeah, it's interesting. It's doing it more in the little yellow channel. Don't want to go too far. We're getting that green tinge around the sun. And there, we go that way. Too much, it's pink. Um, of course, the other way to do this is go into our masking. So let's see how it does with a sky mask. I'll make a sky mask. It looks like it did pretty good. It got some of the mountain in there, but that might be okay. And notice how much detail is actually in that shot. It's pretty good. We don't want that. We don't quite want that level, but we might come back like that. That's probably too much still. Maybe in there. I think it's still too yellow. I want to drop that saturation. Don't think we want to do. Yeah, there we go. Maybe something like that. And once again, if we go in and do another mask and then invert that one. Now we're going to be editing in mask two. Now we can come in and sort of pump that green up if we want to, like that. This is a good one actually to look at some of the effects in detail. So I think a little bit of dehazing on this one is nice. It sort of, brings some clarity back to that. And then, oh, then some clarity. Oh, that looks, that's starting to look nice. Now, what I might be getting into is some real kind of grain on this, but I kind of like that look. And come back up and take a look at our exposure a little bit. All right, let's go back and take a look at the difference here. So we cleared that thing up quite a bit. Looks pretty neat. No, it's looked like a good start. So I'd have to really kind of play with this sky to get it kind of how I want it, but I kind of like that. Remember though, this is just choices. You may like this kind of dark thing, um, but there's a lot of detail there to be recovered. I think this one as well is a good one to really go into and really think about doing something like brightening up those shadows without blowing out those highlights any more than they're blown out. So you could really get in here with this one and oh, look at that. You really can get some of that detail back in the thing. So already we're doing a much better kind of job there. Bring a little bit of contrast black back to it. Now it's starting to look like a much better photo. Um, Something like that. It's a good start. So you can see the raw allows you to uh, really make some drastic change, really get detail out of the shadows, get recover some of that detail in the highlights if you need it. Um, so explore that. We'll look more filmic stuff in class. I did want to point out a couple of other options for you. If you open one of these in Photoshop, uh, it's not giving me the thing, but it will. All right. So if I open with, let's say, go other, and oh, excuse me, Photoshop. For some reason, it's not giving me the option there. But Photoshop will open these raw files. And it has its own raw workflow called Camera Raw that's very similar to Lightroom. You can see it has all the sliders, the all those sections over here. We have the edit, we have the crop, we have the remove, we have the masking. So it's got its own kind of workflow, like like um, Lightroom. It has a little bit different kind of color grading, color mixing area. Um, so some of the controls are in slightly different kind of orientation. But you should be able to kind of work your way through that. So if you prefer Photoshop, you can work in there. The other option is once you're done, you hit open, it'll open it into Photoshop. Standard thing. There is another option for working. There's a couple options actually for kind of free. I have one installed here. I'll show you. It's called Raw Therapy. And this is freeware. I think it's available on PC and Mac. It's not as polished as the Adobe. You can see it's got some of the same controls. They're kind of over here. They're slightly different. But we have exposure section. We have removal, and this is so it's actually it's more complicated. There's the white balance. Um, black and white controls. Uh, and some more detailed stuff. I'm not going to go through this. I've spent enough time yapping. So that's a good option if you absolutely positively cannot work on Adobe products for some reason. But you'll have to look up a guide for a little more detailed information on that. So, all right, good luck.